So Melissa, we definitely come from different worlds, right? Not just the fact that like I live in the land of haggis monsters and kilts. Neither of those things are particularly prevalent in real life, by the way, in Scotland. And you live in
And
America.
gherkins.
Gherkins.
Gherkins too.
Why are
Yeah.
why are gherkins a Scottish thing?
Because I was watching one of your videos the other day on YouTube, and you made some comment about gherkins on a burger. I think it's on the video where you talk about like hero, like making the fold
Mm.
or something. I don't know.
Like, are you brave
That's
enough
what,
to fold here like that? That kind
yeah,
of way. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
A gherkin is a pickle, right?
Hmm.
Okay, yeah. Such a bizarre term. Anyways, go ahead. Yes,
It's,
totally different worlds.
it's a good word though because you can say gherkin like if you're really Scottish, and it's a very
Gherkin sounds
guttural
like
word.
like the name of a dragon that would come out, or some kind of monster that would come out in like a Game of Thrones type fantasy
I don't.
story. Like the Gherkin, release the Gherkin.
Right, it wouldn't be a dragon because
Yeah,
dragons are too noble, whereas a gherkin
yeah.
is like
A
Gherkin the
kraken.
monster. Yeah, some kind of like
Yeah.
ugly, brutish, slimy snake
Sea
monster.
monster.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
leviathan but like more grotesque.
Yeah.
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 This is the best start ever, by the way, to Poker Distilled. So we live in different worlds poker wise as well, right? And that like
Yeah.
I'm the kind of epitome of the guy that grew up online, has never played
Mhm.
a Hendon Mob ranked tournament ever, has never played live poker apart from like home games and the odd cash game in a casino with friends and stuff. My whole career has been like building educational content, mostly for online players, but for poker players in general. But what I've never done, as we just talked about there before we pressed record, is make content specifically for live players. And I think like the whole struggle of the live player, both the education side of the game and the career ladder of the game, like, you know, moving up in stakes, bankroll management, networking as well, because it's often about, it's that old classic capitalist cronyism saying like it's not what you know, it's who you know. Like that's definitely part of
Mhm.
live poker, and it's how you
Mhm.
are as a human being as well. If you take a guy like Gazzy
Mhm.
B, who's being invited to like the hustler game now because he's been making vlogs and splashing around and having fun and not taking it too seriously, and then you compare that to like some Euro reg that's like the epitome of the most hated person in live poker, who
Yeah.
sits there for like, I don't know, 6 minutes and is like, the GTO in this spot, do we call here? I don't know, it's the GTO, I'm Dutch, I take 6 minutes for every decision. You know,
Yeah.
that's just chalk
Yeah.
and cheese, right? So I wonder if today you can give me some of the wisdom that you've picked up through your time in live poker, you know, some of the stuff
Yeah.
you've been thinking about bankroll management and game selection, but maybe we can also talk a bit about the education side of it as well, and what would be good for live players to actually see from a site
Yeah.
like Carrot Corner in the future.
Yeah. I think one of the things that kind of jumped out at me when I first started studying with Carrot Corner, and just got into the Discord and started reading kind of the conversations and the strategy discussions, is that there is a perspective that one could take. I didn't take this, but one could as a live player, saying none of this applies to me. Or if it does apply, it's so theoretical and removed from reality. It's like, you know, the equivalent of, you know, studying some like ancient text and saying, okay, how is that going to apply to the real world? Okay, maybe there's some kind of, you know, very attenuated connection, but for the most part, real people, human beings in real situations at a live poker table don't act like that. So
Right.
like the easiest example is that in a live game, I would say more than 70, maybe 75% or even more of the flops you see are going to be multi-way. So people flat call in spots where they'd be three betting online, or folding. That's just the fact, and it's nine-handed versus six-handed, so you have, you know, you have more players, so you're going to go to the flop with more people. So when you talk about something like a range advantage or a nut advantage on the flop in online poker, well, it may be a little more, that analysis may be a little more pure because it's heads up to the flop. In live poker, saying I have a nut advantage or I have a range advantage is going, whether you like it or not, it's going to be diluted by the fact that there's multiple players in that hand. And by diluted, I don't mean that it doesn't exist. I just mean that it's going to be affected. It's going to be somewhat watered down. And that may matter, it may not matter, but it's something that you have to kind of adjust to. And so I think from a live perspective, a lot, and I know players because I've had this conversation with them where they say, well, I don't really study with players like online players or like, kind of more like European style players because I don't play online and that's not relevant to me. And so I think that's true in some ways, but it's not true in a lot of other ways. And I think that the ways it's not true is that poker theory is poker theory and that it's true really no matter where you're playing, because it's the foundational theory,
Mm-hmm.
it's the objective truth of the game. And so you can't adjust to a live game without understanding theory first. So yes, it doesn't apply directly as it would in an online game, but it does apply. The skill of a live player, I think, is understanding the deviation that has to occur based on the particulars of the live game you're in. So that's just one example.
Yeah, it's funny. Someone asked me earlier. I was making my chicken salad there, and I was looking at YouTube comments on my phone because I'm an absolute masochist who hates himself and wants to be miserable over lunch. And one of the comments was something like, Black Rain 79 says that solvers are a waste of time for microstakes players. Do you agree? It was like something to this effect. And I was like, no, fucking hard disagree. I think that like microstakes players don't know how to use solvers. So yes, coincidentally, they're a waste of time because the people who are at microstakes are not normally very good at using solvers yet. So if they just pick one up and like stare at it and try and copy it, they're wasting their fucking time like no end.
Yeah.
But it's not a waste of time in that it is teaching you, as you say, about the absolute fundamentals, the mechanics, the laws of physics of poker and all of that. So if you can pick up a solver and like fuck range advantage and nut advantage, these are concepts that I wish I'd never even bloody taught sometimes, you know that? Because they are, while they're useful to understand at an abstract level, like applying them directly and trying to like decide what to do with your two cards because of these notions, as you found out near the start of your career, is like kind of bullshit, right? Like that doesn't work. Like you're taking too obtuse a term and you're trying to like bring it in as like causally into all of your decisions, and that doesn't really work. Like, so what if you have a big nut advantage on the turn? That doesn't mean that you can just go ahead and overbet with 8 high, no pair draw, no redraw, no straight draw, no flush draw, bad blockers, because unless there's surplus fold equity there, that's still a hemorrhaging play in theory, like regardless of your nut advantage. All it means is that you can bet big when you are betting. So like, and same with range advantage, like you might have range advantage in a spot, but it's still better to check one hand than it is to bet it, right? So these concepts, they go really too far sometimes, but there are lots of other concepts in the carrot poker school that I think are a bit more specific and understandable in relation to an exact hand that do absolutely just describe the lay of the land and like how things are in objective reality. And it's not too much of a stretch for a micro stakes player to say, oh, well, I learned that like on the turn in position, I'm allowed to barrel with king queen on 10 6 3 3 in a 3-bet pot, right? And they learned that king queen is like a good enough bluff there because it has all these pair redraws and implied odds for hitting the king or the queen against a hand like pocket nines or whatever that's calling you in that spot. And understanding that and then being able to go, oh, but this guy's a fucking beluga whale, I'm not going to do that against him. That's not very difficult, right? To say, I understand that in theory this is good, but this guy is a whale, so I'm not going to do it. Like, why is that difficult? Why is that such a bloody stretch, right? Because you get these people that say GTO is a waste of time at the microsticks. Don't do GTO. You don't do GTO, man. That's not a thing. GTO is just an output. It's an answer at the back of the textbook. Of course, you don't just apply it blindly to a spot. So I think what you're getting at is something really important there, Melissa, which is the difference between objective truths about poker and axioms and logical kind of things that you can remember, right? Like kind of concepts, as it were, and then a set rigid strategy that is the result of those concepts functioning at equilibrium, meaning like solver against solver. And these are two totally different things. And I think that one of the reasons that live players get their own educational pathway wrong. I think you've got yours absolutely right, by the way. I would say that though. I'm fucking biased and it's my site that you went
Mhm.
to and all of that.
Sure.
But
Yep. Yep.
I think the way live players get that really wrong is they say, well, all of this solver stuff and Euro online reg shit that I see, this has nothing to do with the games I play in. But actually it does, because you're playing in the very same game, and you should be learning how the game that you've chosen to play as a career or vocation or serious hobby functions. And then you can decide what to do against each player that you play the game against. But to conflate GTO and Poker Theory is to conflate the game with the player. And that's really,
Yeah.
really stupid, right? Like the
Yeah.
opponent and the game cannot possibly be the same thing. So how on
Right.
earth could it make sense to say learning Poker Theory is bad at the micro stakes? Learning how to play against a solver to like lose as little EV as possible against a solver, that's silly at the micro stakes, like trying to copy that. But that isn't where I would go if I was to say, let's pick a direction for a live player. Let's like build a course. Yeah, I think we would want some of that theory in there, but I don't think I'd build it in the exact same way that the Carrot Poker Skills built either. So what do you think would be good? How do we keep theory, like
Hmm.
concepts that are kind of everlasting and, you know,
Hmm.
not malleable to the who's in the game and who you're up against? How do we take those
Hmm.
concepts and teach them to live players in a way that's going to be more beneficial for the live environment that would deal with multi-way pots and stuff? Any thoughts? Like, what would you have loved to see when you were just starting out, for example?
I think it really a simplified, almost like a list of rules, like here are your 10 commandments that are almost always true. So nothing's going to be true or correct all the time
Right.
in any environment, but well, maybe in equilibrium, but outside of that, like in any environment, everything's going to be subject to some, um, you know, there's a, it's not always going to be true, but you could have some rules that say here are some rules that are very likely true in a live game. And I think on that list, the first one that immediately pops to mind is the concept of fortune reversal. So I think this is like an axiom. This is like almost like a commandment that would be chiseled in stone. If you bet the river and someone races, it's highly unlikely that they're bluffing.
Mm-hmm.
Highly unlikely. There's very few players that find bluffs in that spot, that want to find bluffs in that spot, that are comfortable bluffing in that spot in a live game. Now, I'm not saying that it's always true. Obviously, there are games out there and players that do that, but um, that's something to, I think, that would be one of the rules. Something like that. Something like when you're in a multi-way pot and you have a weaker player who just flat calls out of the big blind, or I'm sorry, out of the blinds, either blind, in a 3-bet pot, the likelihood that they're, going to lead into the flop is highly likely. And the reason is because they're strong, and I think that most players, whether no matter what their skill level is in a live game, understand position, and they understand that if I'm calling out of position, like I need to have a really good hand. And I know this because I've seen it from my experience where players show up flat calling in the small blind and big blind with ace king, ace queen suited, all suited broadways, generally pocket pairs. I've seen queens in that situation in a 3-bet pot, jacks, tens, really anything other than aces or kings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's something to be mindful of as well. And I think that the 4-bet range for most players in a live game is either non-existent or aces. and ironically, not ace king, because
Yeah.
a lot of live players at lower stakes don't like putting money in with ace king before they're forced to. They will if they have to,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't like it, and it's not generally thought of as, they think, okay, well, maybe it's a flip. They understand that it's a flip if it's
Mm-hmm.
heads up, but it's multi-way, so that changes things. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but some of these are like some of this is like the ideas of like the tendencies of live players. So it'd be kind of like a mass data
Mm.
analysis, but based on the fact that you're in a multi-way environment, and players are playing with a certain degree of consistency,
Yeah.
no matter the player type.
I agree. I think they're really predictable. Like I think live players
Yeah.
are, and by the way, we're talking about low stakes live players, like one, two,
Right,
two,
right,
five right now. We're
right.
not talking about like
Yeah.
professionals at 5-10 or anything like that. We're talking
No.
about the bread and butter opponents that make live viable. Because if we had the same edge live that we have online, it would take us like 604 years to like generate an annual salary because we play so few hands per hour. So it's a damn good thing that we have a win rate of 22 BB per 100
Yeah.
instead of 4. So yeah, live poker, low stakes. I think you could add to that list and you could say things like people merge towards the top.
Hmm.
So like that's a really
Hmm.
good axiom. So when a live player donk leads the flop and they're unknown, they will be merged towards high
Yep.
equity, right? So that means that they might have a flush draw, they might have a top pair. They're more likely to have second pair than they are to have a gut shot, actually, in many of these cases, right? Because they're not valuing polarization in the same way that like a competent player is. It's just kind of like I have hand, I bet because have connected with hand, like
Yeah.
hand. And it's like almost as basic as that for a lot of them. And there's loads of other ones you could add to that
That
list as well.
yeah, I want to just pick up on that, that donk lead.
Mm.
I've noticed that that's become a lot more prevalent in my games, is that the lead. So like obviously the kind of classical approach to poker was you check out of position as a procedural matter.
Yep.
That doesn't really, that feels like, I don't know, it just feels like that's, I hate to sound old, but it seems like the younger generation doesn't do that. They don't care. Like the idea that like you're you're leading out of position, making yourself vulnerable to a raise, is non-existent. It's just like,
I don't
I'm
think it's
going
younger
into,
generation. I think it's just bad
okay,
players. I think checking to a
okay,
razor is very much still a procedurally normal thing to do for a young player that's
yeah,
competent, and they're going to understand
yeah.
that. There are some boards you're allowed to donk bet, right, that favor the big blind calling range
Sure,
and
sure. I'm
stuff.
not
But
talking about
yeah,
I'm just talking about doing it as a way of, like you
mhm,
said, merging to the top of the range
right.
where
So
I have top pair.
so maybe we could say a young fish is more likely to just not give a fuck about the whole
Yeah,
procedural checking business, whereas an old fish like grew up and was at one point a reg. Like if you imagine like an old man coffee
yeah,
fish that's sitting there like check to the race or check it over, like
yeah,
this guy
yeah,
probably at one point was like a decent player because he could 3-bet queens, but his opponents could only 3-bet kings, so he had the
yeah,
edge, you know.
yeah,
So you're probably onto something. Like the younger recreational players probably just like fuck it, like I bet I can do what I want, whereas the older one is more rules governed in general. But I think among anyone with any talent or skill in poker who's young, there's not really like a mass like donk bet cult going on where young players are donk betting
yeah,
in the spots they shouldn't be. I think it's more just like recreational younger players are different to
yeah,
older recreational players. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think with live too, you don't have the data that you do as an online player. So like, online you have HUDs, you have, you can put your results into um into a database after you can, I mean, like GTO Wizard has that feature where you can, put all your results into GTO Wizard and see, how much EV you've lost. I know that you've commented about that not being accurate, but regardless, you can get a lot of information about how you're doing and what your tendencies are, and you can also get a certain amount of information about your opponents. And I don't even know, because I don't play online, the extent of the information you get. So I'm just talking as kind of a and I'm just speaking to this as just someone like looking in from the outside.
Yeah.
But as a live player, like you don't have that. You have, here's my win, here's the sessions I've won. Maybe you write down your hands, or you have a way of putting into your phone, certain hand histories that you can go over later, which I do sometimes. But you just don't have that same kind of data set. So you're operating more from, I think, the human tendency to not remember history correctly. So like, I think our memories are incredibly they're incredibly inaccurate. So like what we think is, like, we may think back to a certain hand or a certain player type and remember it a certain way, and it may not have gone down that way, or there may have been an element that you're forgetting. There may have been someone else in the hand that you forget, that it wasn't heads up, all of these things. So I think what that leads to is, it leads to a more kind of insular analysis. Like people's idea of their own play is more based on like their individual perception and not on any kind of external information,
Yeah.
which leads to I think a more kind of, it's just a, I don't know, it's kind of just leads to a different environment because you don't have, you don't have objective information regarding your play.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's also insular in the sense that when they
Yeah.
ask for feedback from one another, they're dealing with live players within the live player community.
Yeah.
And these are people who, not to say there aren't good live players, there obviously are, but the majority of people you talk to at a 1-2 table or 2-5 table, many of them are going to be using terms that are on the Carrot Corner Discord banned list for good reason. You know, they're gonna be
Targeting.
saying things that are a little bit archaic, and they're gonna be maybe just repeating things that come from, I don't know, a YouTube poker vlog, like that kind of style of people
Yeah.
talking about the hands, which are intentionally very dumbed down so that they can be followed by the audience, right? Like I was just talking about Gazzy B earlier. Like I know Gazzy to be a really good, strong, like theoretical player and exploitative player. I've seen him playing online. I've seen him streaming. I've chatted with him about poker. But if you watch like one of those vlogs, what you're gonna see is like a very, sugar coated, dumbed down sort of poker on sweeteners kind of thing, for the audience. And that's fine. That has its place. If you look at like a Brad Owen vlog, he's not going to go into detail about all of the theory because he's trying to drive up his views, and he's going to say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I checked the turn for a bit of pot control here," and that's going to be the end of the
Mhm.
analysis. So you're going to
Mhm.
get live players that are just that's what they started watching when they got into the game. They're playing live, and then someone asks for help. They're like, "Oh, I played this hand," and the guy's like, "Well, yeah, you just checked for pot control," and then that's like the end of the story. So I think that the live community is very, I'm going to sound like a total dick here, but I'm going to say that it's stunted, and I'm going to say it's insular,
Yeah.
and I'm going to say that it's polluted by, I'm going to actually go as far to say that it is, how do I want to put this? Like, with respect to knowledge and education, I want to say it's educationally, like, incestual. Like, there's a lot of, like, knowledge
Mhm.
incest going around, if that makes sense, right? Not the
Yeah.
normal kind of incest, but a specific type about the sharing of information,
Right.
where information is passed within, like, one insular community to the point that it
Mhm.
gets deformed almost like a
Yeah.
baby gets deformed when it's born from an
It's a
ancestral
limited gene. It's a
marriage.
limited
It's
gene
a
pool. It's a
limited gene pool.
limited gene pool.
That's the way
Yeah.
you put it much
Yeah.
more eloquently than I could. I was just like, so they're like
Sure.
fucking each other and they're related, and then this thing comes out and it's got 7 eyes, right? But like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of the concepts that, if I talk to a player that's coming over from live poker, I talked to one this morning. My poor Tuesday students, man, they never get a fucking break because they're always featured on Poker
I know.
Distilled.
I know.
This guy played live many many years ago, and then stopped playing for a bit, and has come back, and like he's really quick, he's really bright, and he picks up stuff really well. Really enjoy working with him. I've got to say that in case he's listening. No, I'm kidding. I do really like this guy. But he will say things from time to time about poker, and it will be this like mutated thought that like comes from some base thought. Like maybe it's based on some
Yeah.
concept that's important. Like the denial of equity is a foundational concept in GTO, right? Like the fact that when you bet, and like take the raw example of, I have a hand with 80% equity, you have a hand with 20% equity. If I bet, you will fold. If I check, you will check, and you'll never bluff. I should obviously bet and make you fold your equity, right? Because I don't make any money unless I don't make any money from you anyway, and you don't
Mhm.
put money in the pot
Mhm.
unless you get there in this hypothetical. So I need to bet, and that illustrates protection perfectly. Like, why wouldn't I bet if that was the situation? Obviously, in the real world, our ranges are more complex than that. I don't know when you have that hand, and it's way more murky, but in principle, that's protection, right? And you might see a live player from a live community talking poker in the pool of players, like at the live table, and they'll say something like, well, you had to protect your hand. You had to protect your hand. The flush draw was
Yeah.
possible. You had to bet for protection there. And they are drawing upon a real term in poker theory. Protection's a thing. It's everywhere. Like equity denial is in many places in the Carrot Poker School. It's a real, true, objective concept. But it's been mutated and deformed out of hand to the
Yeah.
point where it's now you have to bet whenever your opponent could have a draw and you have a pair. And
Yeah.
that's not true. And so I
Yeah.
think that that's what happens is that people throw around these terms, they get validation, they sort of trade validation with one another. Oh yeah, you had to protect your hand there, bro. Oh yeah, yeah, I thought I had to. He could have been flushing. Yeah, he could have been flushing. You had to protect your hand. And you get this like loop of validation to the point where people are quite sure that they're good at poker when they're not, right? They're quite sure that they're much better at poker than they are. And that comes from that inbred knowledge mutating in
Right.
this pool with the limited
Right.
amount of outside input.
Yeah. 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 And I think that there's a fine line between like what makes live poker phenomenal and
Mm,
what makes live poker frustrating. So like often it's the exact same thing. So the hard part I think about playing live poker seriously is that you have to understand that what makes you money in that game are the same things that drive you insane.
mm,
So like the fact that people are calling three bets, out of position with, hands that, are just not, that wouldn't be in a normal, what normal, I guess wouldn't even be close to kind of equilibrium in terms of what would be in the range on in a three bet pot, and then binking,
yep.
turn river or something like that. I had a hand the other night where I had, pocket jacks, and, you know, the run out was all cards under seven and lower. And, I'm betting 75% pot. And the river is a queen, and I check, and villain shows up on the river with queen five off. So like, that's an example of like, you are like, okay, I didn't expect to see that hand here. I didn't expect you to show up with that here. And I often say this, like my reaction a lot of times is to a player showing up on the river with those kinds of cards is like, oh, you had that? And they'll say like, well, like, yeah. And in order to kind of temper my own reaction, I will say things like, oh, okay, well, I just didn't expect to see that on the river,
Mm,
And so my point is that you are in an environment where people are going to do things that are so outside what you expect to be normal and maybe what you've studied,
mm,
but that's also a really good thing. And so you have to be able to keep a perspective that allows you to see the good in what has the long-term good in what is immediately, kind of frustrating.
yep.
And it can be especially frustrating when it's happening over and over again in the same session,
Yeah.
or over a couple of sessions or a couple of weeks or months. Um, but it really forces you to take that long-term perspective, like, and really forces you to pull out. And at the end, also too, in a live session, is that you're going to be physically at the table, like across the table or next to someone who's a terrible player and just winning over and over and over again and winning all the chips.
Your favorite.
And they're in every hand. And like, I have to fight this all the time, but I just have these thoughts like, why am I, sometimes it feels like I've agreed to sit there and just watch awful players play poker
Mm,
against each other. And it's like, because I'm not in the hands, I'm folding pre-flop if I'm
yeah.
card dead.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is the same two or three players are in every hand and going down to every river. And I'm just like, why are these people in every hand? Like, why am I continually watching
Yeah.
these people?
Right.
And it feels like, it can feel like torture, because you're just like, why did I sign up for this? This is just ridiculous.
Well,
And
what if you did it without the poker? Imagine you had a similar
yeah,
experience in some other like social setting that wasn't poker and you
yeah,
were watching a similar interaction. Like you
yeah,
were just in a
yeah,
pub sober watching a couple of drunk guys incoherently
right,
babble at each other.
right, right. Like about like philosophy and just getting it, and like, or something like that, or even people that aren't wasted. Like, I don't know, like if I think back to like my younger self when I was like young and didn't, immature and everything, like talking about subjects that I had no idea what I was talking about. It was like, that it, and other people also having no idea what they're talking about. Like when I was in college or whatever, like it'd be painful. Like it'd be absolutely painful. And so that's kind of what it feels like sometimes. And so I guess the adjustment that you have to make is really numbing yourself to that. Um,
Hmm.
and understanding that you're kind of in that, as you put it, well, I guess as I put it, that limited gene pool world. And so it's like, sounds really snobby, but it's just true.
It's a limited gene pool in the sense that the ideas come from like not a very wide berth of different things. We're not saying that the people have bad genes
No,
that play in the pool,
no.
just in case there's
No,
any
some of these
ambiguity
people
there.
are incredibly, some of these people are, I mean, you're going to play in live games with incredibly successful
Yeah.
people. I mean, very, I mean, I play in normal, there's a couple of regulars that play that are very, very wealthy in my games that like, they just don't, I mean, they don't really care and they look at it as a recreational activity. And I think that's the other part of it that you have to realize is that live players are going to be, there's going to be a portion of them that are just there to have fun. And they, some of them have very limited patience for players who aren't there to either have fun or who they deem take it too seriously.
Hmm.
So maybe this is a good segue to our we can talk about kind of the politics of live poker and the kind of networking. I don't know, that's a bad word, but the kind of the importance of your reputation and
Mm.
the importance of your table presence. That's so important. And it's obviously it depends on where you're playing and what your environment. If you're playing in some city or some town or whatever where there's like one live game,
Mm.
then maybe it doesn't matter as much because you're not going to get, you can't get disinvited. But in a lot of settings, really, it's not just about getting invited or disinvited. It's about whether people like want to give you action
Hmm.
and whether people are, how they're going to react when you're in a pot with them. So I made this mistake, I think, when I first started playing and started studying and started taking poker pretty seriously, is that um, I didn't understand that um, players will either fold against your aggression or just jam on you.
Hmm.
And that's not a good, it's not really, that's not a good thing in most situations, but they'll do that if they feel like, I just don't want to deal with this person who's overthinking every spot, who's, you know, trying to get the exact frequency down and the exact sizing down and all of these things. Like, and that's more a function of how you present yourself at the table. If you're taking 10 minutes on every, that's an exaggeration, but if you're taking more than, I think I would say 30 seconds
Yeah.
on any decision, it's way too long,
Yeah.
just way too long.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to want to play with you. They're going to say, this is taking too long. Like they'll say things like, there's only X amount of money in the pot. What's the decision? You know, hurry it along. So you simply can't do that. And if you do that, obviously you can't get kicked out of the game, but people will be like, oh, you're in the pot, and they'll just fold, or
Mm.
they'll just say, I'm going to just jam on you. And so that part of it is extremely important.
Yeah. I mean, I would push back slightly and say if someone was playing jam or fold against you with a hand that's a clear call, that's really good for you because they're really screwing up there. But I know what you're saying. You don't want people to be folding bad hands pre-flop that they would play against other players because they think you're no fun to play with or are going to take 30 seconds on every decision.
Yeah.
So that's a disaster. Like if you're opening your normal cutoff range and a fish doesn't call 7-6 off against you, but does call it against somebody else, that's really terrible for you, right? So yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, but I mean jam in the sense that they're gonna have, if they have like a better hand than you, like it's not gonna be
right. So they're going to deny
it's not
equity.
gonna be, yeah, exactly. So like it's not gonna be a matter of like, I don't know. I think the key is you want to have like the reputation of being a good player who is also good action. That's
Yeah.
the sweet spot. That's the absolute sweet spot. I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine who plays live locally. He's a professional, and he described me, and I think he was serious. He might have been kidding a little bit, but he basically said, oh, we were sitting at the same table, and he pointed out someone else in the room, and he said, do you know that player? And I said, I think I played with him a couple times. He's like, yeah. He's like, he's a good player, but he's also really good action.
Mm.
And then he was like, kind of like you.
Nice.
And I was like, oh, that's nice. And so I think that that's like the sweet spot, because people will want to play with you. You'll get invited to home games. People will like you. And if, I mean, people just don't like nits no matter how you frame it. Like they just don't like them.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I mean, they may like you as a person, but they don't want to play with you.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if they're there to have a good time, it's really true. And I think like mention those videos that Gazzy B does. I think his approach is one approach to live play, kind of the splashy, happy go lucky kind of approach. and I think that works for him, but that's not the only way to do it.
Hmm.
You could also be, just, um, you could use your provided you have social skills, your general social skills that you would in any other situation, any other professional or semi-professional environment where you're just friendly to people, you engage in conversation when you can,
Yeah.
and that, when you play against them, like, you recognize that they're there to have fun, and that's part of the job, that's part of what you signed up for.
Yeah. It's funny when there are poker players that just don't have that awareness at all. And they might be the kind of guys that are just like really nitty and really risk
Yeah.
adverse and no fun to play with, or they might be people who are trying to get lots of details right and are approaching poker like it's a case of copying some blueprint. Like their job is to memorize
Yeah.
a blueprint and then build a building out of it at the poker table, which I think is like ridiculous. So to give an example of like one of those classic time banking players, it's like trying to figure out what their frequencies are. You mentioned like
Yeah.
frequencies earlier, and like it's one thing to be in the tank about what your hand should do. It's another thing to be in the tank about what frequency you're going to randomize
Yeah.
two options at. And that's just beyond dumb because, in the first place, these two options probably aren't indifferent in the live arena,
Yeah.
like really ever. And
Yeah.
secondly, you should be able to figure out in what way they're not indifferent, which one is preferable. So to sit there and tank about what your hand's going to do is one thing, but to do it
Yeah.
about frequencies is just a whole other kettle of
Yeah.
fish. It's absurd. But yeah, like
And
what do you
I,
go ahead?
I just want to say one more thing though, is
Mm,
that I just want to preface this, is that, I know there's people that listen to this that play with me or are kind of in my pool. And I will say, like, this is like a work in progress. I have not perfect in this way. Like, there are times when I put in my music and I just kind of zone out because I'm feeling tilted, or something stupid happens, or I get frustrated, or I'm short tempered with someone. Like,
mm-hmm,
I am not at all perfect. So I don't want to come across as someone that's like mastered this skill, the soft skill of like how to play in live games. I haven't. And I think, like, it's something that I'm continually working on. But yeah, that's my slight disclaimer
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
with this.
And as we've talked about in previous episodes, like that goes too far as well at some point. Like if someone's being a total dick at the table and you're just
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
tolerating it
yeah,
and validating them for that behavior because you want their money, like there's also ethical concerns there
no,
as well. So
right,
there is
right,
really it's a difficult thing because one,
yeah,
you're there to maximize your own EV and make the right choices and yeah, to try and take as much of the other people's money as possible. That's the aim of the game.
yeah,
While secondly, still being as you would be in some other social situation. And that's a really hard thing to put together. And I know
yeah,
I struggle with it at the live table because these aren't the people I would associate with normally. Like most people who
right,
play live poker, not all of them, some are people I would associate with normally because they're kind of semi nerdy guys or girls with similar interests to me that are into the strategy of the game or whatnot. But I find it way, way easier to have a conversation at the bridge table than I do at the poker table. And that might be because I'm
right,
some like elitist stuck up prick. Like maybe that's all it is. But it could also just be that it's a bit more similar. Like when I'm playing bridge with people, yeah, there's like really snobby, like older people in bridge as well that I feel like I can't have a great conversation with. But the vast majority of people I feel are on my same wavelength that we can talk about things and it's like fairly
yeah,
normal. Even if the conversation's about scones that are being served downstairs or something like that, it's still something I can follow. But at the poker table, it's just like I'll get there and some guy will be like, "You got Palace, mate," and I'm like, "What?" And he'll be like, "You got Palace, yeah?" And he's like watching football as a team, Melissa called
oh
Crystal
yeah,
Palace, right? They play
yeah,
in England. It's just an example. And there'll just be this assumption that I must be betting on that game because that game's
yeah,
on the
yeah,
TV and I'm
yeah,
sat at the poker table. It's like, nah, like I don't give a fuck about Crystal Palace, mate. Like I've
yeah,
never watched a Crystal Palace game and I'm not going to look at that game and I'm sure as hell not going to put any money on it just because it's there. So that's like an alienating feeling, right? And
yeah,
talking to those people about poker, that's an alienating feeling as well.
yeah,
And in bridge, it's not the same
yeah,
way because in bridge, most of the people who are there are kind of competent at the game because if you're not, you can't even be in a bridge club. Like no one will play with you because like
yeah,
it's just absurd. Like it's not even viable. But in poker, you have people that barely know the rules talking strategy to you and stuff, and I find that alienating. So I guess all I'm saying is here that in many live game environments, I feel like an outcast, an outsider. I feel really
Yeah.
alienated, and I find it really, really difficult to be like the life and soul of the table and to be really nice to people and stuff like that, because I just feel like they all have so much in common. They're all bantering away and chatting away. And yeah, I
Yeah.
do feel like I stand out like a sore thumb. I am definitely not like the average poker player that plays in those games, and that's nothing to do with skill level. That's just to do with like the type of human being I would generally spend time with in real life. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think a lot of the kind of geekier online guys, you know, and girls that go and they've studied a lot and they go and they play live and they're there to carry out their strategy, and they're like real hobbyists, or they're like real, like they've got ambitions of doing this professionally or something, and they want to be meticulous and they want to do the best job possible, and they want to go and make sure that ace four suited is in the chart in that position, that it's an okay four bet, and they want to take their time over that. And that's misguided, because like whether it's
Right.
in there or not, it's going to be close anyway usually. And
Yeah.
two, you should be making your decision based on real life factors, not based on the chart
Right.
anyway. But that's what they're trying to do, because that's the way they've studied, and it's really hard for
Yeah.
them to then say, hold on, I'm actually missing out on EV by being that way, because if I just four bet the damn hand and had fun and smiled, like the guy's probably going to give me more action later. I'm probably going to just enjoy myself
Right.
more. I'm probably going to be in a better frame of mind to actually, like, you know,
Yeah.
have sort of lubricated the wheels and the cogs in my head enough that
Right.
they can actually go round
Right.
and round in a good way and get in the zone. But I see these kids, like, not always kids, but usually they're younger people, usually male, because that's the demographic, and they'll sit there and they're like these rusty machines that are trying to recall stuff from a blueprint, and it's just, it's
Yeah.
alienating to the fun players in the game and all of that, to everyone in the game, and it's just also not fun, and it's not how you should approach live poker. So I'm totally with you on that, but I do agree with you that like I'm probably way worse than you are
Yeah.
at actually like being the sociable fun person that's just like really nice to people and stuff like that. I definitely find that difficult, because I feel, at least in the games that I've gone and played in, I just don't have a lot in common with people. I don't know what to say to them,
Yeah.
and I find it hard. I don't want to talk about poker because the gulf in knowledge is just too
Right.
ridiculous.
Right. Right.
And then I don't know what else to talk about because I don't have a bet on Crystal Palace. So like, what am I gonna
Yeah.
do? You know, I find it a bit tough.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I don't it's very rare that I'll actually sit down and have a conversation with someone, but I do agree with you, and I do feel that way, especially the more I study and learn, you do feel more alienated, and it does give you a kind of existential dread
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, like because you can't relate to anyone, and it does make you think like, what am I doing
Yeah,
here?
that's it.
Um, for sure. But it also is incredibly satisfying when you are operating in a space where you feel like comfortable in terms of what to do or the strategy that you're implementing, and it's and it's you're running somewhat close to EV. It's just, there's nothing like it. There's nothing better. It's like catching a wave, or as a surfer or
Mm-hmm.
something, like you just have this momentum behind you. And yeah, it's a lot easier than to kind of be okay with the existential dread that you're feeling or the alienation you're feeling. I 100% get that. But it's when you're not running, it's when you're running below EV, when you have some very loud or obnoxious personalities at the table, when you're just losing, it becomes extremely difficult. But
Not just that, but can I add one
um
other thing to that
yeah,
list just before you go
sure.
on? There's also a type of poker table where no one is having any fun. I don't know if you get this as well, where it's just a bunch of
Yeah,
people sitting there and no one's really winning a lot or losing a lot. Like maybe the guys that are
yeah,
winning a lot are the quiet people, and the fish are
yeah.
stuck and they're pissed off and they're jaded. And there's just this air of like desperation slash kind of, if
Oh yeah,
smoking was allowed, this would be like a like dingy, smoky back room where
yeah,
everybody's not having fun, and it just feels like it's light outside, but you can't see the outside. There's silent sports on the TV. No one's really
yeah,
talking, and it just has this like really horrible atmosphere. And even if you do try and make conversation, it bounces off because everyone's so flat and down in that moment. So
yeah,
is that a thing where you play as well? Like, how do you deal with
yeah,
that kind of live game?
yeah. Yeah, that's usually if you play later than midnight, because the people that are playing that late are usually stuck,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to kind of they're just trying to get even.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean that's tough. I mean, it's really just adapting to the environment. And I've said this before, but I'm constantly reminding myself, what is the challenge in front of me at this moment? And there's, if you're like me, and I think maybe a lot of people are, I don't think it's an uncommon trait, but I'm someone who's kind of an overthinker. And so like my brain will often spiral into conclusions of like, this is going to happen and then that's going to
Hmm.
happen and that's going to happen. And it doesn't spiral to like a positive.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
optimism,
yeah.
it spirals to pessimism.
Hmm.
And so I've been in games where everyone's stuck or tilted or just generally in a bad mood, and it feels like it's going to be like that forever.
Yep.
The key is to remember it's not. The beauty of live poker is someone can sit down and completely change
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
Everything. And I've been in those games where it's 12:30 or 1 in the morning and everyone's serious, and then someone comes in who has come from the bar, has been out having a good time. Maybe it's a couple people, a couple group of friends, whatever. They're just going to go play some poker because the bar has closed or
Hmm.
the pub is closed, as you would say.
Yep.
And they come in and they sit down and they're just super action and they're laughing and they're tossing, splashing chips around, and all of a sudden it just becomes phenomenal.
Yep.
Like the other night, on Sunday, I was playing, and it was a good game for most of the day. And then the action player left. And then the other action player kind of left. And it was like just a couple of regs. And my friend was like, okay, well, I'm going to leave because this sucks. And it's going to be too hard to get another table. It's going to be too long of a wait. And I said, I'm going to be optimistic. So I went over and I put my name on the table change list.
Hmm.
And sure enough, 20 minutes later, I got a table change and went into this table that was full of just 2 or 3 action players. And it turned out to be like a phenomenal night.
Hmm.
And I think the beauty and this challenge of live poker is realizing that it can change at any time, any moment.
Hmm.
And the environment is fluid. It's not always the case. There are times when you're just going to be stuck in that serious shitty game, and you have to realize that and just either leave or deal with it.
Hmm.
But a lot of times it's not. And so that's kind of my way of dealing with it, is kind of recognizing the challenge in front of me. And
Hmm.
is the challenge I have to put up with this, or is the challenge that I have to be somewhat optimistic and just hold out some
Hmm.
hope that this will
Hmm.
change?
And I think another thing I get when I play live, it's very rare that I do that, and it's usually a social thing with friends in London, go to the pub, go to the casino, whatever it may be. And like for me, that's tolerable. But when I do get isolated from people, like let's say there's only one or two of my friends at the table, there are other seats on the table, it's kind of like far away,
Yeah.
like there's not much banter going on, you're there for a few hours and you're card dead, right? Let's talk about card deadness a little
Oh
bit. And
yeah,
you're
card
doing
dead.
nothing, you're
Yeah.
just kind of sitting there folding and
Yeah.
folding and folding. And I always get this thought in my head that's just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you here?
Yeah.
You could be doing so many things that give you, that are either A, relaxing, or B, they're gratifying and stimulating. So, like, I could be playing a computer game I really like and
Yeah.
getting dopamine hits and being engaged. I could be doing something social. I could even just be like sleeping or eating or doing one of the other things in
Yeah.
life that is in some way gratifying on a functional survival level. But instead, I'm just sitting here, not eating or sleeping, not socializing, not having fun, just being. Like I may as well be in prison. I think that's the best way I would describe it. Being card dead at the live table when it's not very much fun socially and there's no one there I really know or want to talk to, that feels like being in prison. And I don't want to feel like I'm in prison. And that's why
Mhm.
back in the day I chose an online route over a live route. I could have gone down the whole live route, I could have gone to America, I could have gone to Vegas more, I could have like tried my hand in that scene more. But I did it for one summer, and many times during that summer, I was just like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I was just like,
Yeah.
how is this even
Yeah.
like a good way to spend my summer? Like, my girlfriend at the time was back home in Scotland. Like, all my friends were back home in Scotland. I'd meet a few people on the road and get on with them and stuff, and that was fine. But then, like, for the rest of that summer, it was basically just, times of like absolute bleakness and loneliness. And it's like,
Yeah.
man, I just wouldn't ever want to subject myself to that, like, on a long term basis. So, how do you deal with the nights where nothing happens for 6 hours? Like, how do you
Yeah.
rationalize to yourself that that's an okay way to spend your time when your subconscious
Yeah.
must be telling you it's not on some level at some of that time, right?
Honestly, my subconscious doesn't tell me that.
Right.
I actually don't, when I'm playing poker, I don't want to be anywhere else
Mm.
because I'm deeply in love with the game.
Wow.
So just like when you're with, a person that really love, you don't want to be anywhere else.
Hmm.
You know that there's all these other things going on in the world, like you
Hmm.
said, that, computer games and relaxing things and all of that,
Hmm.
but you don't care.
Right.
Um, uh, that is how I feel when I play.
Hmm.
I don't really care. In fact, I look at my phone sometimes and I'll read like news or look at, what's going on
Hmm.
outside in the world. And it feels so far away and distant in a way that is like very nice.
Hmm.
So like that's kind of a comfort to me. And that's how I know I'm in love with it, because that's how I feel. I feel the same way, you know, if poker was a person. So
Do you want
that's
poker to be a person, Melissa?
no, I don't, but I'm comparing it to, I don't want it to be a person, but I'm comparing it to the times when I've been in love with people.
Hmm.
And that is the same feeling I've gotten in those
Wow.
situations. That's my comparison.
Yeah.
So,
So that's eye opening. I think it makes me
yeah.
realize that although I once felt that way about poker, I now no longer feel that way about poker. Like there are times, I guess to me, poker is like a wife that I've been married to for like 110 years. So like she still has her moments.
Yes.
It's like times when I'm
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
that's why I love you. That's why I've always been.
Yeah.
You've been so good to me. You've provided for me, and you've looked
Right.
after me. And I love when I get to talk about this element of you or whatever, interact with that
Yeah.
element of you. But you're wifey. You've been wifey for 110 years. There's only so much,
It's only
excitement that
so
that can
much.
bring.
Yes.
Um, and with bridge, I think it's more like it's a newer relationship because it's only like, well, it's what, 6 7 years old as opposed to like 11. But I feel like bridge, I'm going to go full like romantic partner analogy here. I'm going to
Mhm.
indulge you for a second. I feel like bridge is like the person I'm meant to be with, whereas poker is
Mm.
like the person that we had a lot of fun when we were younger, but we got married like quite quickly and we
Yeah.
had kids at like 22, and now we're
Yeah.
90, and it's like, well, maybe life could have been different. Like maybe there's a game out there
Yeah.
that means more to me. I love poker, don't get me wrong. Like it's always going to be my job until I
Sure.
retire and hang up my boots and travel and play golf and bridge for the rest of my life or whatever I do. But yeah, it's definitely not the like poker's not the one for me, but it
Yeah.
sounds like in poker you have met your one, and
Yeah.
that's really special,
Yeah.
and I'm happy
And
for you.
it's funny because I never articulated it like that
Mm,
until just now. And it made me, your comment about wanting to be other places and having to fight that.
mm-hmm,
It just occurred to me that I don't have that. What I have is a impatience or a frustration that maybe my love for poker doesn't feel like it's always returned.
uh-huh, yeah,
So
mm-hmm,
it's like uh maybe chasing someone that uh doesn't isn't doesn't share my
mm-hmm,
interest. I don't know, maybe that's, I think that's stretching it too far. But the point is that when I'm in those situations where I'm card dead, what I have to struggle against is the inner child in me that's impatient and
mm,
demanding and wants things and doesn't want to wait and is saying, if you don't act now, everything's going to be terrible in the future. And look at all these awful, these awful consequences that you can imagine in your brain. All of those are going to come true, blah, blah, blah. Like that's what I'm fighting against. And so when I'm card dead, the way that I deal with it is telling myself, uh, being good at poker means that you fold here.
mm-hmm,
Being good at poker means that you show discipline. One of the dealers who deals like kind of one of my games that I play a lot made some comment to me like um, that he was like, "You're just like one of the most disciplined players." He's like, "You fold a lot, and like you." He was like, "I just have to say, like, I don't ever see you kind of like splashing around in spots where you shouldn't be or whatever." And
mm-hmm,
he didn't say this to me in front of other people, thankfully. But I really appreciated that. I felt like that was a major compliment, because I think a lot of live players don't have that discipline.
mm-hmm,
And the reason is because they're there, especially recreational players. Maybe they're there and they have a couple hours to play, and then they have to go back home to the family, or They are, they're there to have some fun on a vacation, or it's a night out, it's Friday night, Saturday night, they just got off of work, blah, blah, blah. They're not there to like show discipline.
No.
They're there to kind of allow themselves to relax and use it as kind of an indulgent activity. That is an enormous advantage if you're someone who plays seriously and is disciplined, because think about like going into a sporting event where like your opponent, like you're training and you're, in tip top physical condition, and your opponent shows up and says, well, I've just drank a bunch of beer, and I've, been eating like terrible food,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't been training, and now we're going to run a race together.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously that would be a huge advantage. And it's not quite that stark, obviously, in poker. There's a lot of other factors, but in terms of like the mental game, and in terms of allowing yourself to profit from discipline,
Yep.
that's a real big advantage. And I think the other part haven't mentioned about live poker that is a huge part of it is folding, and folding in spots where you don't want to fold, realizing that most people at lower stakes, not all, but most people play pretty face up, and understanding that they're not trying to get tricky, trappy, generally, not protecting their checking range. Generally, they're not really trying to kind of outmaneuver you. It's really just like, as my friend puts it, they usually have it.
Yeah.
And that's not always true. And I there's a lot of caveats, and I think I have a lot more to say about that. But I think that recognizing that you're going to be put in some shitty spots, and that rather than try to convince, this is kind of a personal thing, but try and like, if I'm put into a tough spot and I don't want to fold, my mind immediately starts doing gymnastics to try and convince myself of all the ways that the person could be bluffing, and
Mm-hmm.
all the ways that I'm actually good here. And I think with live play, that's generally not the case. And so a lot of times, like, the EV is in folding, and not allowing yourself to pay off people in those spots.
Yeah. I really struggle to remember a time I like bluff caught someone and was good in a big live
Yeah.
pot, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. It almost reminds me of like chess, where if you need only half a point to win a tournament, but your opponent needs a whole point, then they have to try and win the game, and all you need is a draw. So you can literally just take no risks and wait for them to destroy themselves. And I think that live player thing, where they're out for Friday night, they need there to be a certain amount of dopamine. They need there to be like some hedonistic gratification, because that's the point of the night out, right? We don't go
Mm-hmm.
to the pub, as guys say, as you pointed out, just to, go through the motions and have a procedure and be disciplined and all of
Right.
that. We do it because we want a certain amount of like gratification to happen to us within an allotted amount of time, and then we'll go and deal with the consequences of that later, and deal with a hangover the next day, and go for a run or eat well for a week, or whatever it is we need to do. And it's the same with the live player. They need a certain amount of fun and adrenaline and a rush to happen to them in order to feel like that was a good hedonistic use of time, because we do allocate pockets of our life for hedonistic fulfillment, right? We have little portions set aside for that, and we need that in short bursts with some degree of regularity. So they're coming into that needing that to happen, and you don't need anything to happen. You're just like this vulture that's just like perched there, like, well, if it dies, I'll
Yeah.
swoop down and I'll eat it, and if not, I'll wait
Yeah.
until tomorrow, because there'll be plenty of carcasses. And you don't have to like get
Yeah.
involved and make mistakes and play hands. But yeah, back to the point about folding briefly before we wrap up. Yeah, folding just sucks, right? It's a really ungratifying thing to do. And bluff catching is addicting, right? Whenever you catch a bluff,
Yeah.
it feels really,
Yeah.
really good. You feel like some kind of justice paladin, like fighting off the evil, and you want to
Yeah.
repeat that feeling because you've like smited somebody that was trying to pull the wool over your eyes, and that's
Mhm.
that's an incredibly good feeling, and that's why people love to go after the scammers, as we talked about last week. They want to find the culprits, they want to find the rogues, and punish them. That's a massive human instinct. It's how society has protected itself from, as Peterson would say, the psychopaths that plague society. We've had to stomp them out for many years, and that's what we do, right? We definitely have that addiction towards catching the villain, and folding, knowing that someone might well be doing that to you, they might be taking your money with a worse hand. That is like interpreted by the brain as some form of theft, even though it's not
Yeah.
it's legal within the
Yeah.
rules of poker. there's a deep instinctive interpretation there that that's a theft or a wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So to actually fold when you have a good weapon, like a mighty amount of resources in front of you, let's say trips, and to fold trips to someone who is purporting to have a straight,
Yeah.
that's such a hard thing to do in just base level. So that's why the sort of uneducated, like, new player that doesn't know much about the game defaults towards just making horrible calls. Like, they don't default towards making horrible bluffs, not at all. They default towards just putting all of their money in randomly with some hand that they deem enough to take a stand. And that's
Yeah.
what recreational
Yeah.
players do to us. That's why we have to remember to value bet very big and go for that big pot size jam on the
Yeah.
river with the nuts, and not just bet half pot because that's what our buddy does, and we have to do that. But we also have to fold when they raise you on the river, or they raise turn, jam river, or triple barrel, because those aren't natural ways of fighting back. Like, recreational players, they fight back, right? The live player fights back when they've had enough. They protect themselves, they
Yes.
stand up, but they're
Yes.
not carnivores, they're not predators. They're like a rhinoceros defending itself against prey, against the predator, rather than like a Tyrannosaurus Rex going out to hunt for the night or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. I guess my last point with it is that I think live play is kind of what you make of it, in the sense that you're you're not in control of a lot of things, but you are in control of a lot of things. So like, you are obviously, you're in control of how you play, you're in control of your own behavior at the table. But you're also in control of how you think. And the things that I struggle with, like, my biggest hurdle at the table is not dealing with being card dead. That sucks. It's not, dealing with obnoxious players, but it sucks. What's the hardest thing for me is recovering in game from my own mistakes, and not allowing a mistake to form the basis of a narrative that is going to then take over the whole session. So, like, making a mistake and then being card dead for a while and saying, okay, these are the ingredients that go into having a bad session. Like, the two ingredients in that recipe of a bad session, of a losing session, is making a mistake in a big pot, and being card dead. Like that, those are two big ingredients. Not allowing that to frame my, the way that I approach the session, and understanding that I may be vulnerable to aggression. I may be vulnerable to all of these biases that I have when I'm, in this kind of frame of mind, and that the live game, because it's full of personalities, because it's full of all of this unpredictability, as you put it one time, it's the jungle. It's like the kind of the rawest form of poker, if you will. Because you're in that environment, that if things go wrong, you can get really hurt, you can get really whacked, because the environment is so raw and is so dangerous. It can be. And so I think that's what I recognize as like the biggest challenge for me in playing live, is really just controlling my own mental game and allowing myself to play, take the highest EV line in all spots. And even though I'm in an environment that's incredibly kind of brutal, as you say.
Yeah, and there's a real satisfaction to that, and I get that in bridge, and I wonder if it's I mean, it's not that I don't get that in poker, but I have to really be playing my A game in poker in order to get that. I guess this is saying that, like, if you're with the right person, then things come effortlessly, like it doesn't feel like it's much work or whatever. And if it's tons and tons of work, and you're always having to make adaptations and stuff, then maybe that's not the right relationship, right? People say things like that. And with our choice of game as well, like, if poker for you feels like something that, in order to play your best, you have to do like a million things every time you play, that's just like super unnatural to play your best, maybe you are out of love with the game a little bit. Because I certainly know that I found it way easier to play my A game, like, when I was really in love with poker, and I find it easy to play my A game in bridge because I'm really in love with bridge. But there's certain other games that I've never been able to really, unlocking that A game has just felt like I'm bashing down like a million walls just to get to the thing that I want. And for you, like, that folding and that discipline, that meticulous sort of patience, that is adding to your self-image of being a professional, and serving the game that you kind of worship and adore well, and like being the best version. It's almost like a religion. It's almost like poker is
Mhm.
in some sense like has this theistic place in your heart, and you're kind of like a devotee that's making sure that you are as
Mhm.
pure and as professional, and you're doing the game justice. I think you said something like that to me, like in the early days, that you just want to be
Mhm.
worthy of poker, or maybe it wasn't that word you used, but it was something along
Yeah,
those lines.
yeah, something like that.
Mhm.
Like I I I I want to master what I know in my heart cannot be mastered.
Mhm.
And so like it's really that, I'm happy because like I feel really lucky to have something in my life that like I want to pursue with this amount of vigor, and that I feel this about, because a lot of people don't.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's people that feel this way about, all sorts of things, like you talk to someone that's like a serious, I'll take it completely outside of the world of games,
Yep, yep.
but like someone that's like a serious like model train enthusiast or
They have
something. They're
a VPIP of 9, by the way, in a six max game. But go on.
who does
The train
the train
enthusiast.
enthusiast?
Yeah.
Yes. But they would say things like, no matter how much time and effort I put into my model train world, it'll never be perfect. Like it can always get better.
Mhm.
Like I can always add another storefront. I can always add another
Mhm.
little downtown area, another tree or something like that. I mean, it's one example, but really, those are the most interesting people in the world to talk to, because you would think like, gosh, this like what you've built here is amazing.
Mhm.
Like if you talk to people that are collectors of things, like it's like, wow, you have first editions of all these phenomenal novels, or like, you've managed to collect all of this stuff. There's only 2 or 3 copies of this in the world. Like that's amazing. They're like, well, it's not that amazing. Actually, like there is one other copy out there and I was close to getting it, but I didn't. So I actually am kind of a failure. And you're like, what
Yep.
are you talking about?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And but those are people that are phenomenal to talk to. The people that I feel bad for and I don't really have in my life, I'm lucky because I kind of avoid them, are the people that are like, yeah, I go home every night and I watch TV. Oh, by the way, did you see like the newest like celebrity news? Did you see like the newest celebrity gossip? Did you
Mhm.
see this? Did you see that? Did you follow this? Did you follow that? And it's those are the people that I'm just like, I have nothing to say to you, to you, because you're not obsessed with something,
Mhm.
and what you are obsessed with is like, it's not even obsession, number one,
Mhm.
but number two is that like that's so everyone's obsessed with that. There's nothing unique about it. Like,
Mhm.
okay, like
Maybe
you're
that's just
just
giving in to your natural human instincts and vices. Like maybe in the state of nature, the human impulse for gossip, which is obviously like one of the things that's helped us in many ways, like our
yeah,
ability to gossip and spread information like that throughout a large collective is undoubtedly responsible for our success as a species. So we do rest on those laurels, and we do sort of revert to that. But in the modern day environment where society is already built up and we don't really need this gossip infrastructure in order to thrive anymore, I would say that that is like a succumbing to your sort of natural instincts as and where they're no longer relevant. So like if I
yeah,
succumb to like the natural urge to like eat a massive fucking pizza, my body is saying eat these calories now because they're super, like there's loads of energy in this, and if you don't find a mammoth in the next week, you'll still be all right if you stockpile all this fat by eating all of this cheese and processed food. And by eating that pizza, I'm like feeding an irrelevant impulsive instinct. And I think the people that are going home and watching, okay, sure, you can be interested in celebrities to varying degrees. I don't want to say that anyone who has interest in
no, I
celebrity
don't mean that
culture is an
either.
idiot
Yeah,
or is
no,
wasting their life. But if your main thing that you do is just like gossip on WhatsApp chats while watching like celebrities and talking about their scandals and stuff like that, and that's the only thing you really do recreationally, I feel like that's a vice in the same way that eating a giant pizza every day is a vice because you've got a certain hormone in your brain telling you to stockpile calories. I think it's like it's being defeated by a naturally occurring human process that's actually detrimental. I guess that's what a vice is, right? It's something that
yeah,
can easily defeat you and is natural and had a function at some point, or has a function in some way or form that's no longer the right thing for you to do in this environment that you're currently in today in your life as the actual
yeah,
individual instantiation. of a human that you are. It's just something that once benefited your species or something like that. And I think we can be
Yeah.
slaves to these things very easily. And I think that maybe what you're saying is that by taking an interest in something that exists now as this like abstract creation, like trains, model train set, building a big giant model town of a town that you studied or
Mhm.
something like that. These things have absolutely no, arguably, I would say, no relationship to human survival at all. Like they're in no way one of these hand-me-down genes from the state of
Mhm.
nature that we're slaves to. They're more of like a free choice. So by being really into
Mhm.
like model train collecting or poker or bridge or something like that or Sudoku, I'm kind of saying here's a thing that's
Mhm.
independent to my own like animal existence that I can choose to like master and immerse myself in. And I think you're finding like quite a lot of moral value in something like that, partially because it's not something that we're just slaves to. It's not something that just like, you know, exerts its will over us and makes it do its bidding. It's more something that we
Mhm.
have freely chosen to
Mhm.
indulge in. And I think there's a real
Mhm.
like beauty to that in some way, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think this is a really interesting topic, and I know we strayed off a little bit, but I
Mm,
think that for sure, like there's more that I want to say, and there's more there, and I feel like maybe I'm maybe I just haven't seen it, but I truly don't believe there's any like a really like great content out there for live players. I think that having the theoretical understanding is absolutely crucial. And I will say, like, my game has improved 100% since I started studying, with this carrot poker school material. So there's a lot of value there, but I do think that there is that difference in the live play that is still kind of un unexamined, if you
mm,
will, maybe in a kind of formal setting.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think there
so
are
I don't
sites that
know.
do it. I don't know much about them personally, right? So I don't want to say like there's no good live poker content out there. There may well be, but it's certainly not like as academically mainstream as some of the online content is, and there's a gulf there that we could
Yeah,
bridge. So who knows? Maybe it's something that we could look at one day. But I genuinely think that when you know how human psychology works with respect to poker,
yeah,
like you've been around poker people, you've talked to poker players, you've coached them for a decade or whatever,
yeah,
like you know how the human brain approaches poker like a priori, right? You just know what it's going
yeah,
to do, what it's going to be drawn towards and away from, and you can sort of understand how people are playing. You don't need MDA
yeah,
for that. You know, you don't need, sure, there's no data harvesting available live like there is online, but equally you shouldn't need that. And I would go as far to say that even for online players, some of the most valuable stuff that you can do exploitatively doesn't need to come from MDA. While it's an option, you know, and we have a course for that, grade E of the Carrot Poker School, learning MDA is great, but to see it all in, you know, table form and charts and graphs and things, see it all nicely compiled and organized, once you just get a sense of how human psychology relates to poker, I
hmm
think that's a really powerful thing. So if I was to make a live poker course, I think I would absolutely talk about why humans do what they do just based on their natural intuitions and impulses with respect to the game and how you can take advantage of that. I think that'd be a very big part of it. I don't think I would try
yeah.
and like compile any data or anything like that. And I would
No,
keep the
no,
theory simple. I would
yeah,
introduce like the mandatory building blocks. I wouldn't go into like
hmm
range advantage too much, right? I just say like a very small thing about it. And I would like make sure that the theoretical stuff we taught was simple and that the exploitative stuff was very situational. And I think a list of commandments to steer live players in the right direction when they first start, like things like if you are raised on the river, it will generally be an unnatural spot to bluff in where most people have zero inclination to do so. And you should fold, but explain it a little bit. I think that would be absolutely great. So, like coming up with like 100 live commandments or something like that
hmm
could be a really cool
hmm
way of going about it.
yeah, yeah. Cool, cool. Well, I hope people find this conversation useful, and I certainly did and do. But yeah, if you enjoy this content, if you have comments, please leave them. Let us know what you think. Like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening. Yeah. Anything else, Pete, before
Yeah,
we
I think
say goodbye?
we should probably make the title something like Pete and Melissa obsess over model trains or something like that. Like we need to do a shout out to the aesthetics of model train collecting and
Or we could
the
call it
beauty.
Unleash the Gherkin.
Unleash the Gherkin is
Unleash
better.
the Krakens. Yeah. I know what video, by the way, that the Gherkin comment was on. It wasn't on the folding one. It was on the you are not indifferent
You are
video.
never indifferent to gherkins. You
Never
should
indifferent.
always have them on your burgers. If you're one of those people that takes them off and flicks them away,
I
shame
am.
on you.
I
Shame on you,
am.
Melissa.
I don't like them on my burger. Yeah. No, not me.
Absolutely heartbroken and disappointed by
Uh
this. I thought I knew you, but oh well.
no, no, you don't. I'm full of surprises.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys. See you
Till
next
next
time
time.
on Poker Distilled. Bye for now.